What's up, guys? So today we had a question and like kind of just a bunch of general statements from Jeff Kifferman, um, who basically said a bunch of allegedlys and possiblies, and I'm asking for a friend kind of questions. I basically more or less talking about an issue with a Captcha on Dread. And I hate Captchas. Yeah, not a secret. I think I2P is infinitely easier to connect to Dread and much more reliable. So that's why I made that video to kind of show people like, look, you don't have to, bang your head against the wall with Tor. You can connect pretty fairly easily to I2P. I still have yet to make the Linux version of that video, show people how to set up I2P on Linux, which is really easy. It's really actually straightforward. So let's see some of the other questions about like the problem that you were having for the Captcha on there. I have absolutely no clue. I know in a recent interview that I had with Hugbunter, he had said that there are actually DEF CON talks that discuss his Captchas, which I would love to see. So to answer the question about if everyone left Tor and went to I2P, would it make the network stronger? I don't really know that much about I2P. I know that it's a very good network. I know that it's fairly secure from everything that I've read about it, and the research I've done on it. Looks great. How long will it take for someone to start like doing DDoSes and messing with it? I have no clue. That said, we do know that it's infinitely easier to hop on to, things like Dread, using I2P as opposed to using Tor at this time. And I think like there's a good amount of darknet markets that exist. Darknets in general. Like Tor is one darknet. I2P is another darknet, but there are a fair amount of them. So I think instead of, like we see the, the diversity of darknet markets, I think, in the future, we might end up seeing a diversity of darknets being used, which would be extremely interesting. I think Tor served as a great entry point for a lot of people to step into that world and kind of see what it's like to have anonymity, what it's like to have privacy, all these different things. So I think that was like a really good learning example, or like, introduction to that kind of subculture. So like now, like someone who's maybe had, even if they hadn't done anything illegal, they just talked on the forums, like now that person very well might go through the trouble of installing I2P and switching over to a different darknet just because now they're comfortable with it. They kind of know that subculture. They know that world, and they, maybe they have a certain appreciation for the ability to remain anonymous and not be tracked, and say what they want to say without fear of reprisals or, like cancel culture. So, now like moving on, it's, also, isn't copper distills poisonous? No, absolutely not. They actually remove sulfites. So it's quite the opposite. The reason why people tend to think that is because there was, a few morons who, instead of creating, their copper stills with silver solder, which is what you're supposed to use, which is beneficial to you, these idiots decided to use lead, to save a couple pennies, like literally. And, they poisoned a couple people. It's like, the old adage that like, if you drink moonshine, you'll go blind. That's total nonsense. But there were some, morons who don't know what they're doing, or like, they learned from grandpappy, instead of learning the science behind distillation, they just took some idiot's advice. And then there are just some whack jobs who have cut their moonshine with, trash like bleach, like legit. Like, and I've talked to people who have done this on distiller IRCs, and they're like, yeah, you just add a little bit and it makes it stronger. And I'm like, dude, you're killing people, man. You know, like you are, like you're a super evil person. Like, but those are the people that give, you know, bad names to, you know, people like moonshiners. And you know, it's just what it is. You know, you have to have bad apples kind of in every bunch, it seems like, in order to really appreciate the ones that are good. You know, it's like the duality of man, or like, you know, good versus light, you know, or good versus light, you know, light versus dark, you know, good and evil. You have like those, you know, you have to have one to contrast the other. And I think, like, you know, it's like the drug dealers who, you know, cut their H with Fent, you know, or, you know, like the moonshiners that put bleach in their moonshine. You're going to have those idiots, or you're going to have like those ruthless people, you know, they exist. Fortunately, that's just kind of how it is. I think that's all the questions. I probably missed one. It was pretty long, but it was definitely an interesting. It took a lot of time to type up, and I enjoyed reading it, and I responded a little bit to you, but I told you I was going to put this in a video format, so I wanted to do that too. If you guys enjoyed this video, stick around, because the end screen will show you a video that YouTube thinks you should watch next.